What if everything you thought you knew about aging was wrong? Could something as simple as your diet be the key to staying strong and healthy? What if, by just changing the foods you eat, you could transform your muscles, your energy, and your entire life? It was a crisp Sunday morning in the small town of Maple Ridge when John Reynolds, a 68-year-old former triathlete, sat down at his kitchen table staring at the pile of bills scattered across the countertop. His hands, once strong and steady, now trembled ever so slightly. He had never imagined his life would come to this, a battle with aging, with his own body failing him little by little. But that's the reality now. Every day, it felt as though his muscles were disappearing, his energy slipping away, and the things he once took for granted, like carrying groceries, running for the bus, or simply lifting his granddaughter into his arms, had become monumental tasks. As he glanced down at his phone, a notification popped up. It was from Emily, his 22-year-old granddaughter, who had recently moved back home after college. "Grandpa, I know you're struggling with this whole aging thing, but I want you to watch something I think will really help you. Trust me, you'll be amazed." John raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. Emily was always sending him articles and videos about health, fitness, and lifestyle, most of them written by celebrities or fitness influencers. But this one, she promised, was different. This time, it was about Elon Musk. Elon Musk? John muttered to himself. The tech billionaire with all those crazy ideas about the future. What's he got to say about aging? With a mixture of skepticism and amusement, John tapped the link, and a YouTube video began to load. The title read, "Elon Musk's Tips for Staying Strong and Healthy in Your 60s and Beyond." John chuckled. What could a guy like him know about muscle strength for seniors, he thought, rolling his eyes. Still, his curiosity got the best of him. With a deep sigh, he set aside his bills and settled back in his chair, ready to watch. The video opened with a shot of Elon Musk standing on a stage, speaking to a captivated audience. He was in his mid-50s, still exuding the energy and drive of a man decades younger, despite the pressure of running some of the most innovative companies in the world. John couldn't help but admire Musk's vigor. "Muscle loss as we age is a real problem," Elon began, his voice calm but assertive. "But it's not inevitable. The future of aging is not about slowing down, it's about adapting to the changes in our bodies and using technology, and yes, diet, to our advantage." John leaned forward. Was he hearing this right? "I'm not a doctor," Musk continued, "but in my research, I've found that muscle strength in older adults isn't just about lifting weights or hitting the gym. It's also about what you put in your body. The right foods can make all the difference. Here are 3 foods that can help you keep your muscles strong as you get older. You don't need to wait until you're in your 80s to start, it's never too early, but it's also never too late." John felt a sudden spark of interest. Could diet really help him, a man who had spent most of his life running and cycling, reclaim some of the muscle strength he once had? The idea seemed almost too simple, too good to be true. But Elon Musk, of all people, was talking about it. Maybe there was something to it. Elon's voice cut through his thoughts. "First up, salmon. It's packed with omega-3 fatty acids, which have been shown to reduce muscle loss and increase muscle protein synthesis. A simple serving of salmon a few times a week can do wonders for your muscles, and for your heart, too. It's a win-win." John's mind started to race. He hadn't eaten salmon in years, not since his wife, Linda, passed away. She had always been the one to prepare meals like that, grilled salmon with a side of vegetables, something they had often enjoyed together. But the thought of bringing it back into his life felt comforting. Could this be the missing piece? Musk continued, "Second, eggs. They are a complete source of protein. As you age, maintaining muscle mass becomes more difficult, but eggs are a rich source of the amino acids that are essential for muscle repair and growth. They're cheap, easy to prepare, and incredibly nutritious." John thought about the dozen eggs in his refrigerator. He used to eat them every morning when he was training for triathlons. Could they really help him regain some strength now? And last but not least, spinach. You might not think of it as a muscle food, but spinach is rich in magnesium and other nutrients that support muscle function. It also helps with inflammation, which can be a big problem as you age. John was intrigued. He'd always loved spinach, especially in salads or as a side dish. The idea that something as simple as spinach could play a role in rebuilding his strength seemed almost too good to be true. Elon's words hung in the air as the video ended. If you can make a habit of eating these 3 foods regularly, you'll be giving your muscles the support they need. And that's just the beginning. Keep moving, keep challenging your body, and you'll find that aging doesn't have to mean losing strength. John sat in silence for a moment, his mind swirling with thoughts. Could this really be the answer? Could a simple diet change reverse some of the damage time had done to his body? He wasn't sure, but something inside him, maybe it was hope, or maybe just a desire to feel better, urged him to try. Before he could second-guess himself, Emily's voice popped up in a text. So, what do you think? Ready to try the Musk method? John smiled softly. Maybe. Maybe I am. But there was a catch. Was it too late for him to make a real difference? And more importantly, what if he failed? What if he put in all this effort and still didn't feel better? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning, the video's outro urged, and it struck John that this might be his moment, a fresh start. But where to begin? Was this really the solution, or just another fleeting trend? One thing was certain, he was about to find out. And as he clicked on the next video, he wondered, what was the secret Musk knew that could make all the difference? Could food really hold the key to muscle strength in his golden years? With a deep breath, he closed his eyes and made a decision. Tomorrow, he would start. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? John Reynolds had always been the picture of health, strong, agile, and determined. Back in his prime, he could outrun anyone at the local track, swim across the lake with ease, and cycle through the rolling hills of Maple Ridge without breaking a sweat. For years, he had dedicated himself to fitness, convinced that his body was a machine that could keep working forever, as long as he kept pushing it. But now, at 68, the reflection staring back at him from the bathroom mirror was a far cry from the athletic figure he once was. His hair, once a full head of dark brown, had turned a silvery gray, and his skin, though still smooth, showed the telltale signs of time's passage, wrinkles at the corners of his eyes, age spots on his hands. But it was his body that had changed the most. The muscles that had once been toned and strong were now soft and weak, the energy he once took for granted was now a fleeting memory. John's athletic career hadn't been one of professional glory, but it had been his identity. He was proud of the marathons he'd completed, the triathlons he'd conquered, and the countless hours spent training his body to be the best it could be. Those were the moments he cherished, the times when his body was a testament to his discipline and hard work. But after Linda's passing 5 years ago, everything had changed. Linda, his wife of 40 years, had been his partner in both life and fitness. Together, they had cooked healthy meals, worked out together, and motivated each other to stay fit. Linda had been the one who made sure John stayed on track with his eating, ensuring that their diet was as balanced as their workout routines. It had been a partnership in every sense, one he never imagined losing. When Linda died suddenly of a heart attack, John was left to navigate the world alone. The void she left behind was overwhelming, and with her went a large part of his routine. He stopped working out as much. He stopped cooking healthy meals, finding solace instead in the convenience of fast food and takeout. His motivation to maintain his physical health diminished, as he felt increasingly adrift in a world that seemed to move on without him. The loss of Linda wasn't just emotional, it was physical too. John noticed his body slowly deteriorating. The lack of exercise, the sedentary lifestyle, and the emotional toll had caused his muscles to weaken, his posture to slouch, and his energy to drop. Every time he went to pick up a heavy box or carry a bag of groceries, he found himself struggling in ways he hadn't before. He couldn't even do a single pull-up anymore, a skill that had once been effortless. It was as if the body he had worked so hard to build had betrayed him, and he couldn't understand why. It was Emily, his granddaughter, who had first pointed out how much he had changed. She had noticed it during a visit home from college when John couldn't lift her into his arms as easily as he had when she was younger. Emily had asked him, with the sincerity only a child could muster, "Grandpa, are you okay? You don't look like yourself." Her innocent question hit him harder than he'd expected. Emily was growing up, but he was fading. That moment had lingered in his mind, and it was one of the reasons he had agreed to watch the video on Elon Musk's advice. Emily had always been a health-conscious young woman, pushing John to take better care of himself, even when he didn't feel like it. But that day, when she had asked him that simple question, something clicked for him. He couldn't let his body deteriorate any further. He didn't want to be the grandfather who couldn't keep up with his grandkids. He didn't want to become a shadow of his former self. For months after Linda's death, John had tried to fill the emptiness with a variety of distractions: work around the house, television shows, occasional outings with friends. But nothing seemed to fill the hole Linda left. Without her, he no longer had the same fire inside him. The things that had once driven him forward no longer held the same appeal. He missed the spark of competition, the feeling of breaking a personal record, or the sense of achievement after completing a difficult workout. Now, he just felt tired. He felt stuck. It was around that time that he had started to hear whispers of a new way to approach aging, a way that focused on not just accepting the inevitable decline but fighting against it. He had heard about people who defied the typical trajectory of aging, people who were active well into their 80s and beyond. He'd read about diets, supplements, and exercise regimens that promised to slow down the aging process. But nothing seemed to resonate with him. Until Emily sent him that video about Elon Musk. "Grandpa, just give it a shot," she had urged in her text. "I know it sounds crazy, but if anyone can figure out how to get stronger as we get older, it's someone like Musk." The idea of Musk, the innovative mind behind companies like Tesla and SpaceX, offering advice on aging and muscle health, struck John as both absurd and fascinating. Elon Musk, known for his futuristic ideas and world-changing ambitions, had somehow connected the dots between aging, diet, and muscle strength. Could he really have the answers to the questions John had been struggling with? John found himself at a crossroads. He could keep going down the path of least resistance, ignoring his body, letting it deteriorate, accepting the aches and pains as part of the aging process. Or, he could try something new. Could Musk's unconventional approach be the key to unlocking a new chapter in his life? As he sat in his kitchen, replaying the video of Musk talking about muscle strength in seniors, John felt a spark of hope. It had been so long since he'd felt that feeling, the belief that something could change, that his situation wasn't set in stone. Maybe it was worth trying. Maybe this new diet, this new way of thinking about aging, was exactly what he needed to reclaim his life. "Alright, let's see what this is all about," John muttered under his breath, determination creeping into his voice. He stood up, walked over to the fridge, and pulled out the salmon fillets he had purchased earlier. It was time to take that first step, no more excuses. Little did he know, this small change in his diet would be the beginning of a journey that would not only challenge his body but transform his mind and spirit as well. The following weeks after watching Elon Musk's video were filled with small but significant changes for John Reynolds. At first, it was all about reintroducing healthy habits, getting back to the foods that Musk had mentioned: salmon, eggs, and spinach. Simple enough, right? Yet, for someone who had spent years living in the comfort zone of unhealthy convenience foods, the task felt far more daunting than it sounded. The first hurdle came when John attempted to cook the salmon. He'd never been much of a chef, especially after Linda's passing. She had been the one to handle the cooking, from the simple to the complex, while John stuck mostly to making coffee and toast. Now, standing in the kitchen with a piece of salmon in front of him, he realized how much he had neglected the art of preparing a proper meal. "All right, here we go," he muttered to himself as he pulled out the ingredients. He rubbed the fish with olive oil, sprinkled on some salt and pepper, and then set it in the oven. But as the smell of the cooking fish filled the house, something unexpected happened. John felt a twinge of nostalgia. Linda used to cook the same dish on quiet Sunday afternoons when they weren't out on a bike ride or running errands. Those simple meals were some of the last times they had really enjoyed each other's company before her sudden death. He closed his eyes for a moment, the memory washing over him. His chest tightened, but then he exhaled slowly, pushing through the wave of emotion. When the salmon was finally done, he sat down to eat, savoring the flavor of the meal. It wasn't just a meal, it was a return to something. A return to care, to mindfulness. It was the first real step he had taken in months to reclaim something that had been lost. The moment felt bittersweet, but also powerful. However, not everything was as easy as cooking a meal. The real conflict began to arise when John tried to integrate the other aspects of Musk's advice into his life. For one, there was the issue of exercise. He had once been the picture of physical endurance, but now his body seemed to rebel against him at every turn. That afternoon, after a simple walk around his neighborhood, John's legs ached like never before. He wasn't sure if it was the years of neglect catching up with him or simply the shock of trying to use muscles that had atrophied, but every step felt heavier. When he returned home, he collapsed into his chair, his breathing shallow, his muscles screaming. "I guess I'm not 40 anymore," he muttered to himself. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. It wasn't just the physical strain that bothered him, it was the realization that he wasn't bouncing back the way he used to. The second challenge came when he tried to make eggs a regular part of his diet. It had been decades since he'd eaten eggs every morning, and soon enough, John found himself growing frustrated with his new routine. He would scramble them one day, fry them the next, and even try making an omelette, but he quickly realized he was bored. He missed the variety of meals Linda had prepared, the days when eating didn't feel like a chore. Maybe I should just stick to my old routine, he thought, tempted to return to his bagels and coffee. It seemed easier that way. But something kept him going. Emily had noticed the changes and encouraged him to stick with it. "Grandpa, you're doing great. You've been eating better and getting outside more. That's all that matters. Don't give up now," she texted him one day after their regular video call. Her words were a lifeline. She didn't see the struggle behind the scenes, the aching muscles, the temptation to quit. She only saw the man who was trying, who was making an effort to become better, even if it was hard. Her support helped, but there were days when John's self-doubt crept in, reminding him of the difficult reality of aging. The real turning point, however, came a few days later when John joined his old neighbor, Tom, for a coffee at the local diner. Tom had always been one of those guys who seemed to age in reverse, never out of shape, always smiling, always active. When Tom looked at John with a smile, his face full of life, John felt a pang of envy. "John, you're looking good, buddy. Been keeping up with your workouts, huh?" Tom asked, tapping the table with enthusiasm. John shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He couldn't help but feel like a failure. "I've been trying," John replied, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. "Eating healthier, walking more. But it's hard, Tom. I don't feel like I'm getting anywhere. My body doesn't seem to respond like it used to. It's frustrating." Tom leaned back, eyes thoughtful. "I get it. We all get older. But the thing is, it's not just about the food or the exercise. It's about consistency. It's about showing up every day, even when it's tough. You've got to make a decision that you're not just going to let the years take you down without a fight." John sighed, feeling the weight of Tom's words. He knew Tom was right, but the idea of showing up every day felt exhausting. Every muscle pain was a reminder of his age, every step forward seemed to be followed by 2 steps back. But it was clear now, he was facing more than just physical decline. It was a mental battle too. That evening, John stood in front of the mirror, staring at his reflection. The man who once had the confidence to tackle any challenge now looked like someone who was giving up. The face that stared back at him was lined with years of both joy and sorrow, but more than anything, there was a palpable sense of resignation in his eyes. Was it too late to turn things around? Was he just too old to change? His thoughts were interrupted by his phone buzzing. It was Emily again. "Grandpa, guess what? I'm coming over tomorrow to cook dinner with you. We're going to make a healthy meal together, and I promise, you'll feel so much better. Let's do this." John smiled at the message. He had promised himself he would try, but tomorrow felt like his last chance, his last shot at proving to himself that change was possible, no matter the age. He put the phone down and took a deep breath. Tomorrow, he would have to fight, against his doubts, his age, and the frustration that had been building up inside him. Tomorrow, he would have to show up, just like Tom said. And deep down, John knew that if he didn't start showing up for himself, no one else could. The following morning, John woke up with a sense of determination that he hadn't felt in years. The restless nights, plagued with worry about his health and aging, seemed to fade into the background as the day unfolded. He could still hear Tom's words in his mind, "It's about showing up every day, even when it's tough." As John walked into his kitchen, the sunlight streaming through the window, he found himself feeling a strange sense of anticipation. It wasn't just another day of struggling with his body, trying to piece together some semblance of health. Today felt different. He was going to take action, even if it felt uncomfortable. Today, he was going to confront the reality of aging, but more importantly, he was going to do something about it. His phone buzzed as he pulled out the salmon fillets he had bought the day before. Emily had sent him a text. "Good morning, Grandpa. I'll be there by 4 p.m. to start cooking. Get ready for some serious health transformation." John smiled. It felt reassuring to have her support, even if it sometimes felt like an overwhelming reminder of just how far behind he was. Still, the thought of cooking with Emily was enough to lift his spirits. She always had a way of making even the most mundane activities feel exciting. The first challenge of the day, however, came when John tried to stick to his diet plan. After his morning cup of coffee, he stood in front of the fridge, staring at the eggs, the spinach, and the avocado. In his previous life, breakfast had been a simple routine: toast, maybe some jam, perhaps a quick bowl of cereal. But now, he was being asked to eat more consciously, and it felt like a foreign task. The thought of eating eggs and spinach was daunting, especially when his body craved something sweeter, like pancakes or bacon. "I can do this," he muttered to himself. "It's just a couple of eggs and spinach. Nothing I haven't done before, right?" He cracked the eggs, scrambling them with some spinach, a little seasoning. It wasn't a gourmet breakfast, but it was a start. He took his first bite, and it was far from bad. In fact, it was better than he expected. It didn't take long for him to finish the meal, and he felt surprisingly satisfied. There was no guilt, no discomfort, just the realization that, for the first time in a long while, he was taking charge of his health. But the day's real challenge began in the afternoon, when Emily arrived at his house, bringing with her all the ingredients for a healthy, hearty meal. The kitchen was filled with the delicious aroma of fresh vegetables and lean meats as they prepared the meal together. Emily made it feel like a celebration rather than a chore, her enthusiasm contagious. "Grandpa, you're doing great," Emily exclaimed as she chopped vegetables. "Look at you, cooking like a pro." John laughed, feeling the warmth of her praise. But even as they cooked, he couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability. The reality of his aging body was ever present. His knees ached from standing for too long, his back felt stiff, and he had to take breaks more often than he would have liked. Still, he pressed on, determined not to let it stop him. As the evening wore on, they sat down to eat together, grilled chicken with a side of roasted vegetables and a quinoa salad. The food tasted even better when shared with someone who made it feel meaningful. For the first time in months, John felt like he was truly nourishing his body, not just feeding it out of habit or convenience. "So, Grandpa, how do you feel?" Emily asked, taking a sip of water. John paused, setting his fork down as he thought about the question. It had been a long time since anyone had asked him how he felt about his life, about his health, his future. The simple act of eating this healthy meal with his granddaughter felt like a small victory, but it was also a sign of something larger. It was the first time he had felt in control of his life in a long while. "I feel good," he said finally, his voice soft but full of conviction. "I feel like I'm actually doing something for myself again, something I haven't done in years." Emily smiled. "That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Grandpa, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to keep going. Little steps add up." That evening, as they cleaned up together, John felt a shift within himself. The battle with his body, the frustrations, the doubts, it all still lingered, but something about the act of showing up, of making choices, had started to change his perspective. He wasn't fighting against aging. Instead, he was fighting for the best version of himself at every stage of life. It wasn't about turning back the clock, it was about making the most of the time he had left. As the night drew to a close, Emily kissed him on the cheek and headed out the door, promising to check in on him the following week. John sat in his favorite chair, a cup of tea in hand, reflecting on the day. The house was quiet again, but there was a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. He had taken a step forward, not only in terms of his health, but in reclaiming his sense of purpose. But as the quiet hours of the evening wore on, the challenges of the journey ahead still loomed large. His body still wasn't the same, and there would be setbacks. He knew there would be days when it felt easier to go back to his old ways, to skip the workouts, to ignore the healthy food options. But something had shifted in him. He had taken the first step, and now there was no turning back. John stood up and stretched, feeling the familiar ache in his back. But instead of the old resignation, he felt something different. It was determination. It wasn't going to be easy, but he was ready for whatever came next. He had a long road ahead, but he knew that with every meal, every walk, every moment of effort, he was on a path towards something better. The journey to reclaim his strength wasn't just about muscles, it was about renewing his connection to life, to hope, and to the future. And in that moment, John Reynolds knew he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The following week felt like an emotional roller coaster for John. Each day seemed to bring a new challenge, but there was something about the routine, something about the small victories, that kept him going. Despite the aches and moments of frustration, he found himself waking up each morning with a sense of purpose. For the first time in a long while, his days felt like they had meaning beyond simply passing the hours. But on one particularly grueling morning, that sense of purpose was tested in a way John hadn't anticipated. It started with a routine walk. John had gotten up early, as he had done for the past few weeks, and decided to take a longer route around the park. He wanted to push himself, to feel like he was doing something more than just a simple walk around the block. It was a cool morning, the kind that made the air crisp and refreshing. The sky was a pale blue, the sun just beginning to rise. But as he made his way to the halfway point of his walk, something unexpected happened. The pain in his legs, which had been manageable up until this point, became unbearable. His knees ached with each step, a sharp, biting pain that seemed to radiate up through his joints. His back, too, began to stiffen, making it hard to stand upright. John slowed to a stop, his breathing heavy. He had been pushing himself harder and harder in an attempt to keep up with the new lifestyle, but in that moment, all of his efforts seemed to crash down on him. For the first time in weeks, he felt like a failure. Maybe it wasn't possible to change. Maybe his body had already begun to betray him in ways he couldn't reverse. The thoughts flooded his mind, "I'm too old for this. I'm never going to be able to keep up. What's the point of trying when every effort feels like I'm fighting a losing battle? As John leaned against a nearby bench, resting his hand on his aching knee, he found himself overwhelmed with emotion. The frustrations of the last few months came crashing down. The pain in his body, the effort that seemed to have little return, the loneliness that crept in when he least expected it, it all felt like too much. He closed his eyes and leaned his head back, letting out a long, slow sigh. And just like that, the weight of the world seemed to lift off his shoulders. Not because the pain had magically gone away, but because in that moment, he realized that it wasn't just his body he was struggling with, it was his mind. He had been so focused on changing his body, on trying to reverse the clock, that he hadn't stopped to truly process the emotional toll of what he had been going through. Losing Linda, his partner, his companion, his greatest love, had left a hole in his life, and he hadn't allowed himself to grieve fully. The physical pains, the health issues, the setbacks in his exercise routine were only a reflection of the emotional burden he had been carrying. With a deep breath, John let himself feel it all. He allowed himself to sit with the pain, the grief, the frustration, the loss. He hadn't given himself permission to feel weak, to feel vulnerable. But in that moment, he realized that there was strength in allowing himself to be vulnerable. There was no shame in admitting that he was struggling. As he sat there, his eyes still closed, a memory surfaced. It was from one of his last days with Linda, before her sudden death. She had been sitting at the kitchen table, just like she always did, reading the newspaper. They were in the middle of a conversation about their plans for the summer, about what trips they wanted to take. Linda had always been the optimist, always dreaming about what the future held. "I think we're going to be all right," she had said, her voice calm and soothing. "We're a team, John. We always have been." John remembered the warmth of her hand in his, the way she smiled, even when times were tough. That smile, that assurance, it had stayed with him all these years. And as the memory unfolded, it became clear to him, he wasn't fighting this alone. Linda wasn't physically there, but she had taught him how to live, how to persevere through difficulty, how to show up for himself, even when it felt impossible. She had always believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. Tears welled up in his eyes, but for the first time in a long while, they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of release, of letting go. John felt the heaviness in his chest begin to ease, just a little, as he realized something fundamental: he didn't have to prove anything to anyone, not to his friends, not to his family, and not even to himself. He had nothing left to prove except his own worth. And in that moment, John understood that taking care of his body, pushing through the pain, trying to stay healthy, it was all about honoring his past, his memories with Linda, and his own future. It was a way of showing respect to the life they had built together and to the life he still had ahead of him. With that realization, John pushed himself to his feet, ignoring the ache in his legs. He wasn't done. He wasn't giving up. He still had a lot of fight left in him. "All right, let's finish this," he muttered, a new sense of resolve in his voice. As he continued the walk, the pain still present but more manageable, John felt a strange sense of peace. He wasn't going to get everything right. He wasn't going to change overnight. But he was going to try. For himself. For Linda. And for the future he still had the power to shape. The walk back home felt different, less of a burden, more of a journey. It was a journey not just for physical strength, but for emotional healing. And as he rounded the corner to his house, the weight of the past still with him, he realized that this new journey, this path he had set out on, wasn't just about getting stronger physically. It was about becoming whole again. And that, more than anything, was the victory. The days following his emotional breakthrough felt like a turning point for John. The physical pain in his body didn't miraculously disappear, but something in his heart and mind had shifted. He began to see the struggles he had been facing, both physical and emotional, not as insurmountable obstacles, but as parts of the journey he had to walk through, step by painful step. John knew that healing, whether of the body or the mind, wasn't linear. There would be good days, and there would be bad ones. He had accepted that fact with a calmness that surprised him. His daily walks became more about connecting with his surroundings than pushing through the pain. He learned to listen to his body, to recognize when he could push further and when he needed to rest. And when his legs still ached and his back still stiffened, he reminded himself that it was all part of the process. One afternoon, about a month after that pivotal walk, John sat down at his kitchen table, a cup of herbal tea in hand. Emily had been visiting regularly, bringing him fresh ingredients and keeping him motivated, but today, he was alone with his thoughts. It had been a while since he'd had a moment of true solitude, and he welcomed it. As he looked out the window, watching the gentle sway of the trees in his front yard, he reflected on how far he'd come. He no longer felt the weight of regret pressing down on him. Yes, he missed Linda terribly. But instead of allowing that grief to consume him, he had found a way to live with it. It didn't define him anymore. And his body, his aging, aching body, no longer felt like an enemy. It was simply a part of who he was now. He could work with it, care for it, and even honor it, just as he honored the memories of his past. His thoughts turned back to the first meal he had prepared after meeting Tom, the salmon, the spinach, and the eggs. He had been hesitant, skeptical of the changes, and unsure of his ability to stick with it. But now, he didn't even think twice. It had become part of his routine, his new normal. And as for his relationship with Emily, it had grown stronger. She had become not just his granddaughter but his ally, helping him navigate this new chapter in his life. They laughed together, they cooked together, and they shared memories that kept John's heart warm. Emily had also helped him to reconnect with his friends, reminding him that he wasn't alone, that there were people who cared for him. Despite all the progress, there was still one thing that nagged at him. A lingering question. Could he really do this for the long haul? Could he sustain this new lifestyle for the rest of his life? And most importantly, could he ever truly feel at peace with the process of aging? The fear of slipping back into old habits, into the familiar comfort of unhealthy foods, sedentary days, and loneliness, still lingered. John had experienced what it felt like to push past his limits, to feel the rush of progress, but there was always that underlying fear: what if I fail? What if I'm not strong enough to keep going? His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. "Grandpa, it's me." Emily called from outside. John stood up, feeling a bit lighter than he had in days. Emily had a way of lifting his spirits, even when he was feeling weighed down by doubt. He opened the door, and there she was, carrying a basket of fresh vegetables and a smile that could light up the room. "I brought some goodies for dinner tonight," she said cheerfully, stepping inside. "Thanks, Emily," John said, his voice full of warmth. "I'm glad you came by. I've been thinking a lot about, well, everything." Emily set the basket down and walked over to him. "I know it's been a tough ride, Grandpa. But look at you now. You're sticking with it. You're doing the hard work, and that matters. You're stronger than you think." John smiled, a smile that felt genuine, not just for her sake but because he believed it too. "I'm trying. I think I've finally started to understand that it's not about being perfect. It's about showing up, even when it's hard. Even when I feel like I can't do it. That's all I can do." Emily nodded, her eyes soft with understanding. "Exactly. And you don't have to do it alone. You've got me. You've got your friends. We're all in this with you, Grandpa." The warmth of those words wrapped around him like a blanket, and for the first time in a long while, John felt a deep sense of peace. He wasn't alone. He had people who cared about him. He had his granddaughter, his friends, and even his memories of Linda to remind him that life was worth living, even in the face of aging. That evening, as they sat down to dinner, John felt a sense of gratitude settle in his chest. The food on the table wasn't just nourishment for his body, it was a symbol of everything he had worked for, everything he had gained. It wasn't just about eating healthy or exercising, it was about making the most of the time he had left, about cherishing the relationships that mattered, and about finding peace with the inevitability of aging. "You know, Emily," John said as they ate, "I've been thinking a lot about how life works. We can't stop the aging process. But we can choose how we approach it. We can choose to keep going, to keep fighting for the things that matter." Emily smiled, reaching across the table to take his hand. "You're right, Grandpa. And I think you're doing a great job of it. You're inspiring me, you know." John chuckled softly. "I don't know about that. But I'm trying." As the evening wore on, John realized that the journey wasn't over. It never would be. But he had learned something incredibly valuable. He had learned that it wasn't about reaching a destination, but about embracing the journey itself. He had embraced his body, his past, and his future, and in doing so, he had found a peace that he hadn't thought was possible. And as he looked at his granddaughter, laughing at one of his jokes, he knew that no matter what came next, he would continue to show up. For her. For himself. And for the life he was still building. As the weeks continued to roll by, John felt increasingly comfortable in his new routine. He was more energetic than he had been in years, and although he still had his bad days, the good ones far outweighed them. His body was stronger, his mind clearer, and his heart, though still bearing the weight of loss, had learned to carry it with a quiet resilience. One crisp autumn afternoon, as John sat in his living room reading a book, there was a soft knock at the door. He wasn't expecting anyone, but when he opened it, he was greeted by a figure he hadn't seen in years. "Dad?" The voice was tentative, almost as if the person standing at his doorstep was unsure of his own welcome. John blinked, not quite processing at first. But when he saw the familiar face, weathered by time but still carrying the same warm eyes as he remembered, he froze. "Jake?" John's voice cracked slightly as he took a step back. "Jake, is that really you?" Standing on his doorstep was his son, Jake, who had moved away to another state years ago, right around the time Linda's health had begun to decline. John hadn't seen or heard from him in over 5 years. The distance, both physical and emotional, had grown between them, and John never fully understood why Jake had stayed away, especially when Linda's illness had weighed so heavily on the family. Jake shifted his weight nervously. "I know it's been a long time. Well, I didn't know if you'd be glad to see me, but I've been thinking a lot lately. I wanted to check in." John stared at him for a moment, emotions swirling within him. He had so many questions, so many things he wanted to say, but in that moment, all he could feel was a deep wave of vulnerability. His son was standing here, and for the first time in years, John felt unsure of what to do next. "Come in," John finally managed, his voice steadier than he felt. "It's been too long. We have a lot to talk about." As they sat down at the kitchen table, John noticed how much Jake had changed. The young man who had once been so full of life and promise now looked worn, his face lined with the stress of adulthood. His eyes were tired, and his body language spoke of someone carrying a heavy burden. "I'm sorry, Dad," Jake said after a long pause, looking down at the table. "I didn't know how to be there for you, especially after everything with Mom. I was scared. I didn't know how to handle it, and I think I just distanced myself. I'm sorry for that." John felt a lump form in his throat. The weight of those words hit him harder than he expected. It wasn't that he hadn't understood why Jake had left. Grief can be a cruel thing, and it often pushes people to retreat, but hearing it out loud, hearing the apology that had been long overdue, made the years of silence feel even longer. "Jake," John said softly, his voice trembling a little, "I didn't understand either. I didn't know what you were going through. But I've learned something in these past few months. I've learned that sometimes, you just need to show up. That's what matters most, showing up, even when it's hard." Jake looked up at him, his eyes wide. "You really mean that?" John nodded slowly. "I do. It's never too late to try again. We've both been carrying a lot, son. It's time we stopped letting it pull us apart. For the first time in years, a glimmer of hope flickered in John's heart. It wasn't about fixing everything at once. It wasn't about pretending that the past could be erased or forgotten. But it was about recognizing the power of connection, the importance of family, and the possibility of healing, even after so much pain. Jake smiled faintly, the weight lifting from his shoulders as he listened to his father's words. "I've missed you, Dad. I've really missed you." John reached across the table and took his son's hand, the gesture simple but meaningful. "I've missed you too, son. It's been too long." Over the next few hours, they talked. They talked about Linda, about the years that had slipped away, about the mistakes they had both made, and about the things they had yet to say. It wasn't easy, but it was healing. Slowly, they rebuilt the bridge that had once stood between them, brick by brick. There were tears, there was laughter, and there were long silences filled with memories that still hurt but had also softened over time. As the evening came to a close, Jake stood up to leave, but not before giving his father a long, tight hug. "I don't know where this goes from here, Dad," Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'm ready to try. For us. For Mom. I'm ready to show up." John held his son close, feeling the years of distance melt away in that embrace. "I'm proud of you, Jake. I'm proud that you're here." With a final squeeze, Jake pulled back and gave him a warm smile before walking out the door. John watched him go, feeling an unfamiliar lightness in his chest. It wasn't just the weight of the years that had been lifted, but the weight of the past itself. They had a lot to rebuild, but this was a start. It was more than just a visit, it was a new chapter, one he hadn't dared hope for. As John closed the door behind him, he took a deep breath. He felt something he hadn't felt in years, hope. Hope that things could get better, that healing was possible, and that family, no matter how much time had passed, could always find its way back to one another. And as the night settled in, John sat back at the kitchen table, smiling to himself. He realized that life had a way of surprising you when you least expected it. He had been working on his own journey of self-healing, and now, with Jake's return, it seemed as though the universe was giving him another chance to heal the most important relationship in his life. It wasn't the end of the road, but rather the beginning of something new. The days following Jake's visit felt like a quiet shift in John's world. The air seemed to carry a new kind of freshness, as if the space in his heart, once clogged with regret and sadness, had been cleared just enough to let in some light. It was still early days. He knew that. But for the first time in years, there was a sense of possibility. His son was back. And maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild what had been lost. John took to his daily walks with a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just walking for exercise anymore, he was walking for the chance to make things right, to be there for the people he loved and to continue healing, not just physically, but emotionally as well. His body was still far from perfect, there were days when the pain in his knees and back could be overwhelming, but he had learned to push through it, one step at a time. The mornings were cool, the sun casting long shadows across the streets as he made his way through the neighborhood. On these walks, he often found himself reflecting on his relationship with Linda. Her absence still felt like a void that nothing could fill. But he also began to understand something new about their time together, about the lessons she had left behind for him. Linda had always been the one to hold everything together, to be the steady anchor in their family. And now, in her absence, John realized that he had to step up, not just for himself, but for his family, especially Jake. The next weekend, Jake came over again, this time with his wife and kids in tow. John felt a sense of nervous excitement as he prepared his home for their visit. He had cooked a special dinner, something he knew would bring them all together, grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, and a fresh salad. He wasn't a master chef, but he had come a long way since that first meal he had made for himself. Cooking had become a form of therapy for him, a way to feel grounded, to nourish not just his body but his soul. As the family arrived, John's heart swelled. The laughter of his grandchildren filled the house, a sound that brought both joy and bittersweet nostalgia. Linda would have loved to see them all here, to see her son reunited with his father. It was a reminder that, even in the face of loss, life kept moving forward, and there was beauty in those small moments of togetherness. Grandpa. One of his granddaughters, Lily, ran up to him, her arms outstretched. John bent down and hugged her, the warmth of her embrace filling a part of him that had felt cold for so long. "Hey there, kiddo," John said, ruffling her hair. "How's school going?" Lily grinned, clearly proud of herself. "I got an A on my math test." "That's awesome." John beamed. "You're just like your mom. Always doing well in school." His daughter-in-law, Sarah, smiled warmly as she set down a dish of mashed potatoes on the table. "I think Lily takes after you, John. She's got that drive you've always had." John chuckled, feeling a surge of gratitude. Sarah had always been kind to him, especially in the years following Linda's passing. She hadn't been afraid to step in when John needed help, even when he was at his most difficult. Family, he realized, wasn't just about blood. It was about the people who showed up for you when you needed them most. As they all sat down to eat, the conversation flowed easily. It was clear that Jake had made an effort to repair their relationship, and John appreciated it more than he could express. There was no pretense, no awkwardness anymore. The years of silence and missed opportunities were still there, hovering in the background, but for the first time, it felt like they were moving past them. Slowly, but surely. "So, Dad," Jake said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled around the table, "I've been thinking about what you said the other day, about showing up. I think that's what I've been missing in my own life. I've been hiding from a lot of things, and I want to change that. I want to be there for you, for Lily, for everyone." John looked at his son, his heart swelling with pride. It wasn't just the words that mattered, it was the sincerity behind them. Jake had always been a little distant, emotionally, and John had often wondered if they would ever be able to bridge the gap between them. But now, sitting at the dinner table, surrounded by his family, John realized that this was the beginning of something new. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. "I'm proud of you, Jake," John said, his voice thick with emotion. "It takes a lot of courage to admit when you've been wrong, and even more to try to make it right. You don't have to do it all at once, but I'm here. And I'll always be here." Jake nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thanks, Dad. That means more to me than you know." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of laughter and shared stories. For the first time in a long time, John felt a deep sense of contentment. He had his family around him. He was no longer alone, and the connections that had once seemed broken beyond repair were slowly, carefully, being mended. They weren't perfect, but they were real. And that was enough. As the night wound down and his family said their goodbyes, John stood on the porch, watching them drive away. He felt a sense of peace settle over him, a quiet knowing that this was only the beginning. They still had a long way to go, but they were on the right path. He stepped back inside, the house quiet now, but somehow fuller than before. His routine hadn't changed much, and he still faced the physical struggles of aging every day, but he knew something that he hadn't known before: the most important thing was to keep showing up. For himself, for his family, and for the life he was still building. As he made his way to the kitchen to clean up, a small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. Maybe things didn't have to be perfect to be meaningful. Maybe the messiness of life, with all its ups and downs, was the very thing that made it worth living. He turned off the lights and headed to bed, his heart a little lighter, his spirit a little stronger. In the weeks that followed Jake's visit, John found himself in a constant state of reflection. Each day, as he walked through his neighborhood, he replayed the conversations, the moments of connection with his son, and the warmth of family around the dinner table. It wasn't a perfect reunion, but it felt like a start, a new beginning after so much time spent in the shadows of grief. However, the path of healing was never a straight line. Just as John had made strides in reconnecting with his son, something deeper within him began to stir. Something that had been buried for years, pushed down under layers of responsibilities, obligations, and the weight of loss. It was the grief of losing Linda, and the unresolved feelings he had carried about their relationship. John had always thought he was at peace with Linda's death, that he had done all he could to care for her, to love her through her illness. But as time went on, he realized that there was something he hadn't fully confronted, the guilt. What if there was more he could have done for her? What if there were things left unsaid, moments left unshared? It was this sense of unfinished business that began to cloud his heart, even in the midst of these positive changes in his life. He had made peace with the idea of living without her, but had he truly made peace with her death? Or had he been avoiding something deeper, the feelings of inadequacy that had haunted him during her final years? One late afternoon, as John sat in his favorite chair, looking out the window at the golden hues of the setting sun, he knew he had to face this part of his journey. He needed to let go. The next day, John decided to visit the small park where he and Linda had spent countless afternoons together. It was a place filled with memories, the spot where they had taken long walks, the bench where they had sat and talked for hours, and the trees they had planted together, a small symbol of the life they had built. Walking through the park, the weight of the past seemed to hang in the air around him. He could almost feel Linda's presence, hear her laughter in the rustling of the leaves. But instead of feeling the familiar ache of loss, something different washed over him. It was as if the park itself was offering him the space to release the guilt he had held onto for so long. John took a seat on the bench where they had spent so many afternoons together. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and began to speak aloud. "Linda," he whispered, his voice barely above a murmur, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry if I wasn't always enough for you. I'm sorry if there were times I didn't show up the way I should have. I wish I could have done more. I wish I could have made it easier for you." The words felt heavy, but as he spoke, something within him began to shift. The guilt that had been gnawing at him seemed to loosen, just slightly, as though the act of acknowledging it allowed him to begin the process of releasing it. "I did my best, didn't I? I loved you the best I knew how. And I know you knew that. But I think I've been holding on to the idea that I could have done more. I need to let that go. I need to let you go, and I need to forgive myself." A quiet calm settled over him as he spoke, as if Linda herself was listening, and perhaps even offering her own forgiveness. It wasn't about erasing the pain or forgetting the love they had shared, it was about making peace with the fact that their time together had come to an end. John sat there for what felt like hours, the sun sinking lower in the sky, the park quiet and still around him. The only sound was the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant chirp of crickets. He didn't need to say anything more. He just needed to be there, in that moment, with his thoughts, his memories, and his heart. When he finally stood up to leave, there was a sense of lightness in his chest that hadn't been there before. He had let go. It didn't mean the pain was gone, it would never be gone, but it meant he was no longer carrying it alone. He could breathe again. That evening, as John sat down for dinner, the phone rang. It was Jake. "Hey, Dad," Jake's voice came through the line, warm and familiar. "I was thinking about you. I've got a little time this weekend. Would you like to go out for lunch? Just the two of us." John's heart swelled with gratitude. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to him. "I'd like that very much, son," John replied, his voice steady, but filled with emotion. "It's been a while since we had a good chat." As he hung up the phone, John reflected on the progress he had made. In just a few short months, he had gone from being a man isolated by grief and regret to someone who was finding his way back to the people he loved. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect, but it was real. The next morning, John woke up early, feeling the energy of a new day coursing through him. The sun was shining, the air was crisp, and there was something about the world outside his window that felt full of possibility. He had come to realize that letting go didn't mean forgetting, it meant accepting that there were things in life beyond his control. It meant forgiving himself for the things he couldn't change and embracing the opportunity to make the most of what he had now. It meant showing up, not just for his family, but for himself. He was still healing, still growing, but he was no longer haunted by the past. The future was waiting for him, and he was ready to step into it, with an open heart and a willingness to embrace whatever came next. After letting go of some of the emotional burdens that had weighed him down for so long, John felt like he was standing on the edge of a new chapter in his life. The healing process, though slow and sometimes painful, had begun to bear fruit. But there was still much work to be done, not just on his emotional well-being, but on his physical health, too. The pain in his joints hadn't gone away, and the limitations of his body still felt like an invisible wall he couldn't quite break through. But as John looked at his reflection in the bathroom mirror one morning, he realized that his journey wasn't just about reclaiming the past, it was about shaping a future where he didn't just survive, but thrived. John had spent the past few months experimenting with different forms of exercise, gentle stretches, short walks, and even light weight training. It wasn't easy. His body, after years of neglect, was sore and stiff, but he was persistent. He knew that in order to build a stronger future, he needed to start from where he was, not where he wished he could be. One morning, after a light breakfast, John decided to try something a little more challenging. He had heard about strength training for seniors, simple, low-impact exercises designed to build muscle, improve balance, and reduce pain. He had always thought strength training was something for younger people, but now, with more research and a little encouragement from his doctor, he decided it was time to give it a shot. In the living room, John set up a small space with a yoga mat and a set of light dumbbells. He had no idea what to expect, but he was determined to see it through. As he began his first set of exercises, he focused on slow, deliberate movements. He did seated bicep curls, squats to a chair, and resisted leg lifts. Each movement felt awkward at first. His muscles, stiff from years of disuse, protested at every turn. But instead of pushing through the pain, he listened to his body. He focused on maintaining good form and moving with control. When he finished the set, John felt a small sense of accomplishment. He hadn't done much, just a few sets of simple exercises, but it was a start. His muscles were sore, but it wasn't the same kind of pain he had felt from overexertion in the past. This was different, this was the kind of pain that meant progress. He could feel the strength, however small, beginning to build. Later that afternoon, after a quiet walk through the neighborhood, John took a seat on the porch. He looked out at the familiar street, the old houses with their well-kept lawns, the children playing on the sidewalks. It was a simple scene, but in that moment, it felt like he had everything he needed to move forward. As he watched the world go by, John thought about his family. His son, Jake, had made strides in his own life. They had spoken on the phone the night before, and Jake had mentioned that he was planning to visit soon. John had noticed a different tone in Jake's voice lately, more open, more present. It seemed like their connection was growing stronger with each passing day. Jake wasn't the only one who had been changing. John's own approach to life had shifted. He wasn't just waiting for things to improve. He was actively making them better, one step at a time. Whether it was his physical strength, his emotional resilience, or his relationships, John was beginning to realize that the power to change his life didn't lie in the past. It lay in the choices he made today. That evening, as he sat down for a quiet dinner, John thought about the concept of strength. Strength wasn't just about lifting weights or enduring pain. It was about resilience, perseverance, and the ability to keep moving forward, even when the path wasn't clear. It was about finding strength in the small things, the love of family, the support of friends, the ability to learn and grow, no matter your age. For John, the real strength was in showing up every day, even when things felt hard. It was in pushing through the tough moments, even when it felt like the odds were against him. And most of all, it was about being kind to himself, accepting the fact that life was a journey, and not a race. The next morning, John woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. He went through his stretches and light exercises, this time pushing himself just a little harder. He was beginning to notice subtle changes, his legs were stronger, his posture better, and most importantly, his pain was more manageable. The exercises had become a routine he looked forward to, something that made him feel not just physically stronger, but emotionally steadier, too. Later that day, Jake called to confirm their lunch plans for the weekend. "I've been thinking about something, Dad," Jake said. "I know it's been a long time since we really spent time together, just the two of us. I want to change that. I want us to make some new memories. What do you think?" John felt a surge of gratitude at his son's words. It was moments like these that made all the work of healing and rebuilding worth it. Not just the physical strength, but the emotional strength, the ability to show up for each other, even after years of silence. "I think that's a great idea, Jake," John replied. "I'm looking forward to it." As John hung up the phone, he realized how far he had come. The journey was far from over, but the road ahead felt less daunting. There was strength in the relationships he was rebuilding, in the body he was strengthening, and in the quiet acceptance that he didn't have to be perfect to be happy. For the first time in a long time, John felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. Stronger, not just in body, but in spirit. Ready to face whatever came next. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? It had been several weeks since John had first stepped into the realm of strength training, and already, he felt a noticeable shift in both his body and mind. His physical health was improving, his energy levels were higher, the soreness from his workouts was becoming less intense, and even his posture seemed to have improved. But more than that, John felt a new sense of pride. The progress wasn't just about how much weight he could lift or how many squats he could do. It was about consistency, determination, and the belief that he could change his circumstances, one step at a time. But life, as always, had a way of throwing curveballs when things seemed to be going smoothly. It was a Tuesday afternoon when John received a phone call that would shift his focus in ways he hadn't anticipated. He was sitting in the living room, sipping on his afternoon tea, when the phone rang. It was Jake. "Hey, Dad," Jake said, his voice sounding a little different than usual. "Can we talk?" John immediately sat up straighter, sensing the seriousness in his son's tone. "Of course, son. What's going on?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. John could hear the faint rustle of papers, followed by Jake taking a deep breath before speaking again. "I've been thinking a lot about my life lately, and I've realized there are things I need to say, things I need to apologize for," Jake said. His voice cracked slightly, and John's heart sank. He'd always known that their relationship had been strained, but hearing his son's vulnerability in this moment left him feeling both proud and unsettled. John felt a lump form in his throat, but he chose his words carefully. "Jake, you don't need to apologize for anything. We've been through a lot. I know you've been trying, and that's what matters." But Jake wasn't done. "I'm not sure if I'm ready to say all of this to you in person, but I think I need to. I've been carrying this weight around, and it's time to let it go." John took a deep breath, sensing that his son was opening up in a way he had never done before. "Jake, listen. Whatever it is, we'll get through it together. You don't need to be perfect. I'm just glad we're talking." Jake was silent for a moment before responding, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I haven't always been the son you needed me to be, Dad. I know I've let you down. And I know I've taken the easy way out by not confronting things. But I want to change that. I want to make things right between us." Hearing these words, John's emotions welled up inside him. This wasn't just an apology. It was an invitation to heal. It was Jake's way of saying that he recognized the hurt in their relationship, and he wanted to make it better. It was the kind of conversation John had hoped for, but never imagined would come so soon. The weight of years of silence and unspoken words was starting to lift. "I'm proud of you, Jake," John said, his voice thick with emotion. "This means more than you know." The conversation lingered for a while longer, with Jake continuing to express his feelings, talking about his regrets and the struggles he had faced in his own life. John listened with an open heart, offering words of reassurance where he could, but mostly just letting Jake speak. It was the kind of raw, honest conversation that had been missing for so long. By the time they hung up the phone, John felt a deep sense of gratitude. His relationship with Jake was still a work in progress, but it was a turning point. The heavy silence that had loomed over their connection for years was starting to dissolve, replaced by the kind of open communication that John had longed for. The next few days were filled with introspection for John. His son's words echoed in his mind as he went about his daily routine. He found himself thinking about all the conversations they hadn't had, the things left unsaid, the emotional distance that had grown between them over the years. But as he sat in his living room one evening, he realized something important: healing, whether in his body or his relationships, wasn't a linear process. It was messy. Sometimes, the path forward was unclear, but that didn't mean it wasn't worth pursuing. He had learned that both physical and emotional strength required vulnerability, effort, and, most importantly, patience. The next weekend, when Jake came over for their lunch together, John could sense a change in the air. There was a quiet understanding between them, a mutual recognition of the effort they were both putting into rebuilding their relationship. They spoke about things they never had before: memories, dreams, and even their shared grief over Linda. It wasn't easy, but it felt real. They sat at the small cafe in town, a place they had visited many times before, but this time, the atmosphere was different. Jake ordered a simple sandwich, and John opted for a salad. The conversation was light at first, catching up on work, Jake's recent projects, and John's new fitness routine, but it soon turned deeper. "Dad, I think I've been holding back a lot of stuff because I was afraid to face it. I didn't want to disappoint you, and I didn't want to admit that I wasn't okay. But I'm starting to realize that we all need help sometimes, and it's okay to ask for it." John nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "I've learned that, too. Strength doesn't mean having all the answers or being perfect. It means being willing to face the tough stuff, even when it's hard." As they shared a quiet moment, John realized that their conversation wasn't just about apologies or regrets, it was about moving forward together, embracing the messy process of healing, and learning to support each other. Later that night, John sat alone in his living room, reflecting on the day. The weight of words, of saying the things that had been held in for so long, had lifted a heavy burden from his shoulders. It wasn't easy, and it didn't solve everything overnight, but it was a step. The conversation with Jake had opened the door to a new kind of connection between them, one that was built on honesty, vulnerability, and a shared commitment to healing. John realized that he had been carrying his own burdens in silence for too long, just as Jake had. But now, they were learning to let go of the weight of those unspoken words and rebuild what they had lost. It wouldn't happen overnight, but it was happening. And that was enough. After the transformative conversation with Jake, John felt a subtle but powerful shift in the air around him. It was as if the burden of years of silence had been lifted, allowing him to breathe more freely. But even as he took these first steps toward healing, there was still a long road ahead. The weight of time had shaped him in ways he was only beginning to understand. His physical recovery, his emotional recovery, none of it was easy. But there was something more. The realization that, even at his age, it wasn't too late to change his life in meaningful ways. The next week was filled with small victories. John continued his strength training routine, gradually adding more weight and pushing himself to perform more complex exercises. He had been taking it slow, following his body's cues, but now he felt confident enough to start building some real momentum. Every time he stood in front of the mirror, he could see the subtle changes. His muscles were becoming more defined, the sagging skin around his arms and abdomen was tightening, and even his back, which had once felt so stiff and fragile, was slowly becoming more flexible. These small physical gains weren't just about vanity, they were about a sense of accomplishment. Every weight lifted, every stretch completed, was a reminder that he wasn't giving up. He was fighting for a new version of himself. But it wasn't just his body that was changing. As John continued to deepen his relationship with Jake, he found himself reflecting more on the passage of time. He thought about the years he had spent working, raising his family, and trying to live up to societal expectations. But he also thought about the years he had lost in silence, in regret, and in fear. He realized that time was a commodity he couldn't get back, and with each passing day, he had a choice, to let the weight of missed opportunities drag him down, or to seize the time he had left to make something meaningful of it. One evening, as John was finishing up a set of squats, he received a call from his sister, Nancy. It had been a few weeks since they had spoken, but they had always been close. They had grown up together, sharing the same small town and the same family stories. Nancy had been one of the people who had encouraged him to start exercising again, knowing the toll that time and neglect had taken on his health. "John, I've been thinking about our conversation the other day," Nancy said, her voice warm and familiar. "And I think you're right. It's never too late to change things. But I've also realized something, time doesn't just slip away, we let it slip away. We make choices about how we spend it, and sometimes, we waste it." John paused, feeling the weight of her words. He had thought about time in the abstract before, but now it felt personal. It felt like a challenge. "You're right," he said slowly, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "I've spent so much time focusing on what I didn't do, or what I couldn't do. But you're right. The time we have left is up to us." Nancy was quiet for a moment, and then she said something that would stick with John for days to come. "John, don't wait for tomorrow to do what you could do today. You've already wasted enough time. Start making your time count." The conversation ended with a promise to catch up soon, but John couldn't shake the weight of her words. Don't wait for tomorrow. It was as though a light had clicked on in his mind. Why had he waited so long to take action? Why had he allowed years to slip by, thinking that he had time to fix things later? He realized then that the key to living a fuller life wasn't about waiting for the perfect moment. It wasn't about seeking perfection in his body or in his relationships. It was about showing up for himself, right now, and making the most of the time he had. It was about taking the steps, no matter how small, to build a life that reflected who he wanted to be, not who he had been. The next morning, John woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. He didn't wait to start his workout. He didn't tell himself that tomorrow would be better, or that he'd have more energy then. He just got out of bed, put on his gym shoes, and went straight to the living room, where his weights and yoga mat awaited him. As he began his routine, he found himself thinking not just about his muscles or his mobility, but about his life, the life he was building, the relationships he was repairing, and the strength he was cultivating in himself. Each movement felt intentional. Each weight lifted was a symbol of his commitment to make the most of his time. He had set goals for himself before, but this time was different. This time, the goals weren't just about physical transformation. They were about a complete shift in mindset. John wasn't just building muscle, he was building a foundation for a better life. He was laying the groundwork for a future that wasn't bogged down by past regrets. Later that day, as John sat down to lunch, his phone rang again. It was Jake. "Hey, Dad. I was thinking about what we talked about last time. I know it's a slow process, but I think we're really making progress. You know, not just with the stuff we've been talking about, but with everything, work, life, health. We're both moving forward." John smiled to himself, feeling a warmth spread through him. It wasn't easy, this process of rebuilding. There were days when he felt like giving up, when the weight of everything, his age, his regrets, his physical limitations, felt like too much. But then there were moments like this, where he realized how far he had come, and how much further he could go. "Yeah, I think we are, Jake," John replied, his voice full of pride. "It's slow, but we're getting there." As they talked, John realized that time, though finite, was something he could control. The weight of the past might never fully disappear, but he no longer had to let it define his future. He had the power to make each day count, to invest in the people he loved, and to build a life worth living. And maybe, just maybe, that was all that mattered. As the weeks passed, John's routine had become an ingrained part of his life. Strength training wasn't just something he did to get through the day, it was now his lifeline. Every time he set his feet on the mat or gripped the weights in his hands, he felt a sense of purpose that transcended physical exertion. It wasn't just about getting stronger, it was about breaking the barriers that had once held him back. The weight of his past, the unspoken regrets, the fractured relationships, John had been carrying these burdens for years. He had never realized how much they had held him back until he started to lift. It was as if every rep, every set, was not just strengthening his body, but releasing a little more of the emotional weight that had been weighing him down. But despite the progress, there were still moments when doubt crept in. It wasn't always smooth sailing. John had started to lift heavier weights, but sometimes, in the middle of a set, he could feel his muscles protesting. The soreness was intense, and occasionally, he questioned whether he was pushing himself too hard. One particularly difficult morning, after a grueling set of deadlifts, John found himself sitting on the edge of the bench, panting heavily. The burn in his legs was almost unbearable, and his hands, slick with sweat, gripped the barbell with a white-knuckle intensity. He had promised himself that he wouldn't stop pushing until he hit certain goals, but the physical limits he was experiencing began to feel overwhelming. "Maybe I'm too old for this," John muttered to himself, his voice hoarse. It was a thought he had been avoiding for weeks, but in this moment, it felt too strong to ignore. The thought of slowing down, of giving up on his progress, lingered in his mind like a dark cloud. It was the easy option, the escape from discomfort. And yet, deep down, John knew it wasn't the right one. He thought back to the conversations he had with Jake and Nancy, about not waiting for tomorrow to start living fully. He had made so many excuses in the past, telling himself that change was something that could wait. But this time was different. Taking a deep breath, John wiped his brow and stood back up. He reminded himself that change wasn't linear. It wasn't about perfection, it was about persistence. He wasn't going to let a moment of doubt stop him from continuing on his journey. "You've got this," he said to himself, his voice steady. He placed his hands back on the barbell, and this time, he felt the weight of determination more than the weight of the iron. With a renewed sense of resolve, he powered through the next set. The burn in his muscles was still there, but it no longer felt like a sign of failure, it felt like progress. And that was exactly what he needed to remember: growth didn't happen without pushing through discomfort. It didn't happen without breaking barriers. Later that afternoon, as John was sitting on the porch with a glass of water, Jake called again. They had been talking more frequently since their last heart-to-heart, and their conversations had grown deeper, filled with understanding and mutual support. "Dad," Jake said, his voice light but serious, "I was thinking about what you've been doing lately. And honestly, it's kind of inspiring. You've really been pushing yourself. I can tell." John smiled, feeling a rush of warmth. "I'm just trying to stay consistent. It's not easy, but I keep reminding myself that I've got to keep going. If I stop now, I'll never get where I want to be." Jake chuckled. "That's what I've been trying to do too. I've been thinking a lot about pushing through my own barriers, you know. Whether it's work or just personal stuff. It's tough, but I'm trying to face it head on." "Good for you, son," John said, feeling a surge of pride. "You're right. It's not about waiting for the perfect time or for everything to be easy. It's about making the most of what we've got right now. We can't afford to wait for everything to fall into place." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Jake spoke again. I've been thinking a lot about our relationship too. You know, it's been a long road, and I don't know if we'll ever completely get over everything that happened, but I want to be better. And I want to keep building this connection with you. Not just for you, but for me too. John felt his heart swell. This was the kind of conversation he had always dreamed of having with Jake, raw, honest, and full of a desire for change. "We'll get there, son," John said, his voice thick with emotion. "We're already making progress. Every day is a step forward." The next morning, John woke up feeling more energized than he had in weeks. The soreness in his muscles from the previous day's workout was still there, but it felt like a good kind of pain, a sign of his body adjusting and growing stronger. The mental barrier he had encountered the day before had been broken, and now, it was time to continue forward, no matter what. He finished his morning routine, took a quick shower, and sat down to breakfast. As he ate, his thoughts wandered back to the notion of barriers. He realized that the barriers he had been fighting were not just physical, they were emotional, mental, and even relational. His strength training was an outward manifestation of his inner struggle. He was fighting for the person he wanted to become, the father he wanted to be, the man he knew was still inside him, waiting to emerge. The process of breaking down barriers was ongoing. Every day presented a new challenge, a new opportunity to grow. But John had learned something essential: breaking barriers wasn't just about overcoming obstacles. It was about facing them head-on and choosing to keep moving forward. John's journey wasn't just about strength, it was about resilience. It was about showing up for himself, even on the tough days, and reminding himself that progress wasn't linear. Some days, the barriers would feel insurmountable, but other days, they would crumble under the weight of his determination. The early morning light streamed in through the window, casting a warm glow over John's living room as he prepared for his daily workout. Today, something felt different. There was an energy in the air, an almost palpable excitement. It wasn't just the usual motivation that came with crossing off another day from his calendar, it was something deeper. Something internal. John had been at this for months now, and although there were still moments when he felt like he was battling the clock, pushing against the aging process, and challenging his body, he realized that consistency had become his secret weapon. It wasn't about dramatic changes or overnight results. It was about showing up, day after day, no matter how difficult or mundane the tasks felt. Slowly, those small moments were adding up. When he started this journey, the goal had been simple: to regain his strength. But now, it was about so much more. John wasn't just focused on getting stronger in his body. He was focused on the habits that formed his life, the consistency that powered his progress, and the resilience that grew with each step. Every time he worked out, he wasn't just building muscle, he was building character. The sound of his sneakers hitting the floor with each step felt louder today. As he began his warm-up, he thought about how far he had come. It wasn't just the physical transformation that mattered now. It was the mental shift, the realization that he was doing something for himself, that every rep, every stretch, every drop of sweat was proof that he was no longer a passive observer in his own life. He was an active participant, and it felt empowering. Later that morning, as John finished his workout, he took a moment to look at himself in the mirror. His muscles were more defined, his posture stronger, his face brighter. The physical changes were unmistakable. But the changes within him were just as profound. Where once he had doubted his ability to keep up, he now felt capable. Where once he had been uncertain about his worth, he now saw strength, not just in his body, but in his spirit. As he wiped the sweat from his brow and grabbed a protein shake, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Jake. "Jake, hey, Dad. I just wanted to check in. How's everything going with the workout?" John smiled as he typed back. "John, it's going great, son. Honestly, I feel stronger every day. It's not just the muscles, it's everything. I'm showing up every day. And that's making all the difference." Jake's reply came almost immediately. "Jake, that's awesome, Dad. I can tell. You've always taught me the value of consistency, but I'm starting to see it in action with you. I've been trying to apply it to my own life too." John paused, feeling a swell of pride in his chest. It wasn't just his physical strength that he had passed down to his son, it was his commitment to persistence, to showing up no matter the circumstances. The example he set by choosing consistency, even when things felt tough, was something Jake had noticed, something he was now trying to implement in his own life. "That's what it's all about, Jake," John texted back. "If you can keep showing up, even when things aren't going perfectly, that's where the real change happens. Don't focus on the end result, just focus on the process. And trust that the progress will come." The next few days passed in a blur of workouts, meals, and moments of reflection. John's energy was steadily improving. He felt stronger physically, but more importantly, he felt more centered. It wasn't just about lifting weights anymore, it was about lifting his own life. One afternoon, after a particularly challenging workout, John found himself sitting outside on the porch, enjoying the calm of the afternoon sun. His body was sore, but it was a good kind of sore. The kind that signaled progress. As he sipped his water, Nancy called. "John, how are you holding up? I've been hearing about your workouts from Jake, and I just wanted to check in." "I'm doing well, Nancy. Really well, actually. I've been sticking with it, staying consistent. And it's paying off." Nancy chuckled. "I'm glad to hear it. It sounds like you're in a really good place. But I know it hasn't been easy. What's been the hardest part for you?" John thought for a moment before answering. "I think the hardest part has been sticking with it when I didn't see immediate results. In the beginning, it was easy to get discouraged. But now, I realize that the key isn't in those big wins, it's in showing up every single day, even when I don't feel like it. That's what's making the difference." "You've always been good at consistency, John," Nancy said with a laugh. "You might not have realized it, but it's been a strength of yours for years. Whether it was work, family, or just getting through tough times. You've always shown up. And now, it's showing in how you're taking care of yourself." John smiled. It was true. He had always been someone who showed up, at work, at home, in his relationships. But it wasn't until now, until this journey with his health, that he realized the true power of that consistency. It wasn't just about fulfilling responsibilities or getting through the day. It was about committing to a process, about making that commitment a non-negotiable part of his life. As the week went on, John's workouts became less about the number of sets or reps and more about the habits they represented. Every session was an act of self-care, a reflection of the strength he was building, not just in his body, but in his mindset. It wasn't just the workouts that had become a consistent part of his life. His eating habits were improving too. He found himself more mindful of the foods he was choosing, paying attention to what nourished his body and gave him energy. He had even started planning his meals, preparing healthier options ahead of time so he could stay on track. One evening, after a satisfying dinner of grilled salmon and vegetables, John sat down with a notebook, jotting down his thoughts. He had been reflecting a lot on the concept of consistency lately, and how it was a thread running through every part of his life. Whether it was his health, his relationship with Jake, or his personal growth, consistency was the foundation. John realized something important as he wrote: consistency wasn't just a strategy, it was a mindset. It wasn't about waiting for motivation to strike or for the stars to align. It was about deciding that no matter what, you were going to show up. You were going to keep going, even when things got tough, even when progress felt slow. It was the daily choice to commit to the journey, to trust that over time, the small efforts would add up to something meaningful. John had always been a man of routine. His daily schedule was predictable: work, family time, meals, and of course, his fitness routine. But now, after months of pushing himself in the gym and focusing on his health, he realized that his routine had taken on a deeper meaning. It was no longer just about checking things off the list, it was about rediscovering purpose. He had always been a dedicated father, a loyal friend, and a hard worker, but somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of himself. He had gotten caught up in the demands of life, work pressures, family expectations, and the never-ending cycle of responsibilities. In all of that, John had forgotten what it felt like to truly live for himself. He had been existing, rather than living. But now, something had shifted. The workouts, the meals, the long conversations with Jake, they were all part of a larger journey. A journey where he wasn't just trying to get healthier, he was trying to reconnect with the version of himself that had long been buried. The version of himself that had dreams, passions, and a sense of excitement for life. That version of John was still there, somewhere under the layers of time and responsibility, and now, he was finding his way back. It was a crisp Saturday morning when John decided to go for a walk in the park. The air was fresh, the sun was shining, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't have a single thing on his schedule. There were no meetings, no workout to rush to, no pressing obligations. It was just him, the open sky, and the gentle hum of nature surrounding him. As he walked, he let his mind wander. He thought about all the things he had learned in the past few months. About strength, not just physical, but emotional and mental. About consistency, not just in his workouts, but in showing up for himself every day. And about the power of change. It wasn't easy, and it hadn't always been fun, but it had been worth it. John stopped by a bench and sat down, taking in the view of the park. Families were out for walks, kids were riding their bikes, and joggers were passing by. The park was alive with energy, and for a moment, John felt a sense of belonging to it all. He had been so focused on the grind for so long that he had forgotten what it was like to just be. In that moment, he realized that this journey wasn't just about getting physically stronger, it was about rediscovering his sense of purpose. It was about finding joy in the small moments, in the simple act of breathing in the fresh air, of enjoying a quiet walk, of being present. It was about being open to the possibility of something more, something beyond the daily grind. As John continued his walk, he noticed a group of elderly men gathered around a chessboard, deep in concentration as they moved their pieces. One of them looked up and smiled as John passed by. "Morning, my friend," the man said warmly. "Taking a break from the usual?" John nodded, returning the smile. "Yeah, just needed some time to clear my head. Life gets busy sometimes, and you forget to stop and appreciate things." The man chuckled. "I hear you. It's easy to get caught up in the rush. But the secret is to find balance. You can work hard, but you've got to make room for moments like this too." John stopped and turned to face him. "You're right. I've been so focused on improving my health, on pushing myself to be stronger, that I forgot what it's like to just enjoy life." The man's eyes twinkled. "Sometimes, it's the simple things that keep us going. Find joy in the little moments. Take care of your body, but don't forget to nourish your soul." John felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. It was a reminder he didn't know he needed, but one that resonated deeply. For so long, he had been in survival mode, just getting through each day. But now, he was beginning to understand that life was about more than just surviving. It was about thriving, about finding joy in the process of living. That evening, as John sat down to a quiet dinner, he reflected on the conversation with the man in the park. He had always been a hard worker, always striving to achieve the next goal, to improve himself, to make his family proud. But now, he realized that he had been neglecting the most important part of his life, enjoying it. He thought about his relationship with Jake. They had made great strides, but there was still work to be done. He had been so focused on his own transformation that he hadn't taken the time to appreciate the progress they had made together. He needed to be more present, more engaged. He needed to show up not just as a father, but as a partner in their shared journey. John smiled to himself, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about muscle strength, it was about emotional strength, spiritual strength, and relational strength. It was about being present in every moment, showing up for the people who mattered most, and making the most of each day. The next day, John took Jake up on his offer to spend the day together. They spent the morning at a local museum, talking about everything from history to their favorite childhood memories. It was a simple outing, but it felt meaningful. As they walked through the exhibits, John realized that it wasn't the activity that mattered, it was the connection. They were sharing time, sharing experiences, and rediscovering the bond that had been strained for so many years. Later, as they sat down for lunch, Jake turned to his father. "You know, Dad, I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About consistency. About not just showing up for workouts, but showing up for life." John nodded. "It's true, son. It's all about showing up. Every single day, no matter how hard it is. That's what really makes a difference." Jake smiled, his eyes filled with understanding. "I get it now. I've been pushing myself to show up at work, to get things done, but I think I've been neglecting the important stuff, like spending time with you, being present with the people I care about." John felt a surge of pride. "You're on the right path, Jake. It's all about balance. Work hard, but don't forget to live." As the day came to a close and John headed home, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. His muscles were stronger, yes. But more importantly, he had rediscovered his sense of purpose. It wasn't just about lifting weights, it was about lifting his life. He had learned that true strength came from living with intention, from showing up not just for the gym, but for the people and experiences that mattered most. The weeks following John's discovery of purpose were transformative. His life, once dominated by a predictable routine, began to feel like a living, breathing story unfolding in real time. No longer did he approach his health journey with just the aim of improving his physique, he now approached each day as an opportunity to grow in all areas of his life. He wanted to be stronger physically, yes, but emotionally and mentally, too. And this new strength wasn't just about lifting heavier weights or running faster, it was about lifting himself up to a new level of awareness and understanding. One late afternoon, as John sat in the park watching the sun set, he had an epiphany. All of the lessons he had learned, the importance of consistency, the value of rediscovering purpose, had culminated in a single truth: true strength wasn't about resistance or pushing against the world. It was about adaptability. It was about responding to life's challenges with resilience and an open mind, embracing each obstacle as an opportunity for growth. As he watched a family walk past, laughing together, he thought about his own relationship with Jake. Their connection had strengthened over the past few months. They had grown closer through shared experiences and open conversations, but John realized that there was still room for growth. He wanted to be more than just a good father to Jake. He wanted to be a mentor, a guide, someone who could help him find his own path, not just in fitness but in life. That night, as John sat down for dinner, Jake joined him at the table, his face lit with excitement. "Dad, I've been thinking," Jake started, leaning forward. "About what you said, about consistency and purpose. And I realized something. I've been focused on my career, trying to climb the ladder, but I've been neglecting other areas of my life. Like my health. My relationships." John raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Go on." "I want to make a change," Jake continued. "I've decided to start working on my fitness, taking better care of myself. And I want to start focusing on building better relationships too. I think I've been running away from my emotions a little, and it's time to face them." John's heart swelled with pride. "That's great, son. I'm glad to hear that. But just remember, change isn't about perfection. It's about progress. And you don't have to do it alone. I'm here, every step of the way." Jake smiled. "Thanks, Dad. That means a lot." In that moment, John knew that this wasn't just about him anymore. It wasn't just about his journey to strength, it was about creating a ripple effect, sharing his newfound understanding of balance, consistency, and purpose with Jake. And, in turn, watching his son embark on his own journey of growth. Over the following weeks, John and Jake spent more time together, both at the gym and at home. Jake had started training with John, and they developed a routine of working out together. It wasn't just about lifting weights anymore, it was about building something deeper. Every session became a chance to connect, to talk about their struggles and successes, to encourage each other. But the most surprising change for John wasn't in his body. It was in the way he viewed his own self-worth. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was truly becoming the man he wanted to be, physically strong, emotionally grounded, and mentally clear. It wasn't always easy, and it certainly wasn't fast, but the progress was undeniable. Every workout, every conversation with Jake, every small victory, these were the things that made him feel more alive. One evening, after a particularly intense workout, John sat on the bench, catching his breath. Jake, exhausted but grinning, flopped down beside him. "You know, Dad," Jake said, "this is harder than I thought. But it feels good. Like, really good. I don't think I've ever felt this strong, inside, not just outside." John looked at his son, his heart full. "I know exactly what you mean, Jake. Strength isn't just about muscles. It's about mental toughness, too. It's about showing up, even when you don't feel like it. And that's the part that's going to change your life." Jake nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I think I'm starting to get it. It's not about having everything figured out right now. It's about doing something every day that moves you closer to who you want to be." John smiled. "Exactly. The key is progress, not perfection. Just keep showing up." A few weeks later, as the two of them prepared for another workout, John noticed that Jake was more confident, not just in the gym, but in life. He was making healthier choices, staying consistent with his training, and spending more time nurturing relationships. He wasn't perfect, no one was, but he was learning, growing, and becoming stronger every day. And John couldn't have been more proud. That evening, after a dinner filled with laughter and conversation, John sat with Nancy on the porch, reflecting on the changes in their lives. "You know, Nancy," he began, "I think I finally get it. True strength isn't just about pushing through pain or fighting against the odds. It's about finding balance and learning to adapt to the challenges life throws your way. It's about embracing change, being present, and staying consistent." Nancy smiled and nodded. "I've seen the changes in you, John. And I can see the positive impact it's having on Jake too. You're not just building your muscles, you're building a stronger family." John felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had spent so many years focused on work, on responsibility, on doing what was expected of him. But now, he realized that life was about so much more than fulfilling obligations, it was about living with intention. It was about strengthening the bonds he had with the people he loved, about embracing his own journey of growth, and about sharing that strength with those around him. The next morning, John woke up earlier than usual, feeling energized and eager to begin the day. He wasn't just looking forward to his workout, he was looking forward to living. Each day was a gift, and he knew that the true strength came from how he chose to live it. As he made his way to the gym for another session with Jake, John's thoughts drifted back to the conversation they'd had weeks ago. They had started this journey together, both striving for strength, but now, they were striving for something even bigger. They were striving for a life full of purpose, meaning, and connection. And that was the greatest strength of all. John had always believed in the value of hard work, individual effort, and pushing through challenges on his own. It had served him well in his career, in his personal life, and in his journey of physical fitness. But lately, something had shifted. He had begun to realize that while personal effort was important, the real power of transformation came from the people around him. It was a chilly Thursday morning when John met his old friend Matt for coffee. Matt had been a close friend in college, someone who had always pushed John to be his best, but also someone who had drifted out of his life as the years went on. As John walked into the coffee shop, he spotted Matt sitting in the corner, his eyes lighting up when he saw John approaching. "John," Matt said, rising to give him a hug. "Man, it's been too long. How've you been?" John smiled, feeling a wave of nostalgia. "I've been good, Matt. Really good. Life's been interesting lately. A lot of changes, you know." They sat down and began catching up, talking about their families, work, and the ups and downs of life. John shared the details of his fitness journey and how he had started focusing on building not just his body but his emotional and mental strength as well. He spoke about the connection he had developed with Jake and how he had learned to embrace balance, consistency, and purpose in his life. Matt listened intently, nodding. "Sounds like you've really turned things around, John. It's impressive. But, you know, there's something to be said for the power of community. It's not all about doing it alone." John thought about that for a moment. He had always considered himself self-sufficient, relying on his own strength to carry him through tough times. But Matt had a point. Over the past few months, John had found that the relationships he had nurtured, whether with Jake, Nancy, or even new friends, had played a pivotal role in his personal growth. It wasn't just about what he could do alone, it was about how the people around him helped him grow and thrive. That afternoon, John returned home with a sense of realization. As he walked through the door, Jake was sitting at the kitchen table, his laptop open in front of him. "Hey, Dad," Jake greeted. "How'd the coffee with Matt go?" "It was great," John replied, sitting down across from him. "We had a good talk. You know, Jake, we've always focused on the idea of personal strength, about being strong on our own. But lately, I've been realizing how much more powerful life is when you surround yourself with the right people. It's not just about what we can do alone, it's about the power of community." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Community? You mean, like the gym?" John chuckled. "Well, yeah, in part. But it's more than just that. It's about the people we surround ourselves with in all areas of life. Friends, family, even the people we meet along the way. The people who support us, challenge us, and push us to be better. We're all stronger when we have a team behind us." Jake leaned back, processing his father's words. "I guess that makes sense. You've always been the one telling me to work hard and push myself. But you're right. I've been so focused on my own stuff that I've overlooked how much support I get from you, from Mom, from other people." John nodded. "Exactly. And that's what's been so important in my own journey. It's not just about doing everything on my own. I've realized how much I've learned and grown from the people around me. And it's made me stronger, not just in the gym, but in life." The next day, John decided to take action on this new realization. He reached out to a few of his old friends from work and the gym, suggesting they get together for a small gathering. The idea was simple: a group of people who shared a common goal, a community that could inspire each other to be better in every area of life. John wasn't sure what to expect, but he felt it was time to put the power of community into practice. As the evening approached, John was pleasantly surprised by how quickly people responded to his invitation. His friends were excited about the idea, and soon, they had all agreed to meet at a local restaurant for dinner. When John arrived at the venue, the group was already gathered at a large table. There was Matt, of course, along with a few other familiar faces from the gym and his work colleagues. There was laughter, light-hearted conversation, and a sense of camaraderie that John hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just a gathering. It was a community, a group of people coming together to share their experiences and support each other in ways that went beyond the surface. John sat back for a moment, taking in the scene. He looked at his friends, his family, and the people around him who had helped him along the way. He realized that this sense of belonging was something he had been missing for a long time. He had spent years trying to prove something to himself, but now, he understood that life wasn't about proving anything, it was about sharing, learning, and growing together. As the night went on, the conversation shifted to deeper topics. People shared their personal struggles, their triumphs, and the ways they had supported each other through difficult times. John felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the people in his life. It was clear that each of them had their own journey, but together, they formed something greater, a network of strength, encouragement, and love. At the end of the evening, John walked away with a newfound appreciation for the value of community. It was a reminder that no one had to go through life's challenges alone. Whether it was a workout, a personal struggle, or simply the ups and downs of everyday life, the people around him could offer support, perspective, and encouragement that would make all the difference. The following week, John made it a point to continue fostering these connections. He reached out to people, organized more group activities, and made sure to spend time with those who mattered most to him. His workouts with Jake became more than just a physical challenge, they became a bonding experience. He noticed that Jake was thriving, not just because of the fitness goals they were setting, but because of the environment they had built together. They were both growing in ways they hadn't expected. Nancy also seemed more connected than ever. Their conversations, once limited to day-to-day logistics, had deepened into discussions about their shared goals, their dreams for the future, and their growing sense of purpose. Their relationship had strengthened, and John couldn't help but feel grateful for the support they had given each other. One evening, as John reflected on the week's events, he sat on the couch, a sense of peace washing over him. His physical strength had improved, yes, but his emotional and relational strength had grown even more. And it was all because he had learned to embrace the power of community. He had learned that while individual effort was important, the real strength came from the connections he fostered with the people in his life. He smiled, looking around at his family. Life wasn't just about lifting weights, running faster, or achieving personal milestones. It was about lifting each other up. And in that moment, John understood that his greatest strength came from the people he loved, and from the people who loved him in return. Even with the growing sense of community and the consistent progress John had made, life had a way of throwing curveballs when least expected. For all the strength he'd built in his body, mind, and relationships, he couldn't shield himself from the fact that life wasn't always going to go according to plan. It was a typical Monday morning, with John heading to his office after a morning workout with Jake. He had been feeling particularly good about his health journey, his relationships, and his career. But as he walked into his office, he was hit with a wave of stress he wasn't prepared for. His boss, Mr. Williams, called him into his office. As John entered, he could sense the tension in the room. The usual small talk was absent, replaced by a serious tone. "John, I need to talk to you about something, Mr. Williams began, without even offering John a seat. "We've been looking over the department's performance, and I'm afraid the numbers aren't where they should be. We need more from you, and we need it fast. This company needs leadership, not just more effort. If you don't start showing results, we may have to rethink your position here." John's stomach dropped. This wasn't the conversation he had been expecting. He had always prided himself on his work ethic, but this felt different. It wasn't just about the numbers or the deadlines, it felt like an attack on his worth. "Understood," John said, trying to keep his voice steady. But inside, he was reeling. The weight of the conversation pressed down on him, and for the first time in months, he felt a sense of self-doubt creeping in. As he left the meeting, John's mind raced. He tried to push away the negative thoughts, he had come so far, hadn't he? But the pressure started to build, and he felt his confidence slowly draining away. He knew that he couldn't let this knock him down for too long, but the weight of it was heavy. Later that evening, John sat at the dinner table, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. Jake, as usual, was animated and eager to talk about his day, while Nancy spoke about a project she was working on. But John couldn't shake the heaviness in his chest. He was present physically, but mentally, he was somewhere else. Finally, Nancy noticed the change in him. "John, what's going on? You've been quieter than usual." John sighed, rubbing his forehead. "It's work. It's not going well. My boss is putting a lot of pressure on me, and I just don't know if I can meet the expectations. I've been working hard, but it feels like it's never enough." Jake, hearing the concern in his father's voice, looked up from his phone. "Dad, what's going on? You always tell me to push through, to stay strong no matter what. But it sounds like you're feeling pretty overwhelmed. Are you okay?" John hesitated for a moment. He didn't want to burden Jake with his stress, but he also didn't want to hide the truth. I guess I'm struggling a bit. I've been pushing myself so hard, and it feels like no matter what I do, it's never enough. Work, life. It's all adding up." Nancy gently placed her hand on his. "John, you've been working non-stop. You've built so much strength, physically, emotionally. But even the strongest people need to take a break sometimes. This job pressure is hard, but don't let it make you forget how far you've come. You're not alone in this." Her words were a balm to his wounded pride. He realized she was right. He'd been so focused on pushing through, proving his worth, that he had ignored his own needs. His own mental and emotional health. The pressure of constantly proving himself had taken its toll. That night, after the kids had gone to bed, John stayed up, reflecting on the conversation. As he sat in the living room, the silence felt overwhelming. He was used to feeling like the rock in his family, the one who held it all together. But in that moment, he realized that even rocks can crack under pressure. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that he hadn't been honest with himself. He'd been so focused on pushing through, on doing everything alone, that he had neglected to ask for help. He had failed to reach out to his support system, to share his struggles with those who cared about him. He picked up his phone and texted Matt. "Hey, I've been struggling a bit lately. Can we meet up soon? I could really use someone to talk to." It wasn't easy for John to admit he was struggling. But deep down, he knew it was the first step in healing. He couldn't keep carrying everything on his own. The next day, Matt responded immediately. They arranged to meet for coffee the following afternoon. When they sat down, Matt could see the weight in John's eyes. "You okay, man?" he asked gently. John sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I don't know. I feel like I'm failing. Work is overwhelming, and I've been pushing myself so hard to keep up. It's starting to feel like nothing I do is enough." Matt listened intently, offering no judgment. "You've always been the type to take everything on your shoulders, John. But here's the thing, no one can carry everything on their own. We all need help. We all need to lean on others. If you keep trying to do it all, you'll burn out. You need to talk to your boss, tell him you need support, and take care of yourself too. Your health, your relationships, those are more important than any job or deadline." John felt a wave of relief wash over him. It was as if a burden had been lifted from his chest. "You're right. I've been so focused on trying to be perfect, on trying to do everything right, that I forgot that it's okay to be human. To need help. To not have all the answers." Matt smiled. "That's the first step, my friend. Recognizing that we're all in this together. You don't have to do everything alone." As the conversation continued, John began to feel a shift. The weight he had been carrying for so long didn't seem so heavy anymore. It was still there, but he had learned that sharing it, whether with Matt, Nancy, or Jake, made it more manageable. When John left the coffee shop that afternoon, he felt lighter. He still had challenges ahead, work was still demanding, and the pressures of life were never far off, but he now knew that he didn't have to face them alone. That night, as John and Nancy sat together after dinner, he shared everything that had happened. He told her about the conversation with Matt and how he had realized that his strength wasn't just in pushing through. It was in accepting that it was okay to lean on others when needed. Nancy smiled and squeezed his hand. "I'm proud of you, John. For asking for help. For being honest with yourself. This is a part of growth, too." John nodded, his heart full. He knew the road ahead would still have its ups and downs, but he also knew he wasn't walking it alone anymore. He had a support system, a community, and the strength to face whatever came next, together. After his conversation with Matt, John found himself in a reflective state for days. The weight of his stress didn't magically disappear, but a sense of clarity began to take root. He realized that healing, whether physical, emotional, or mental, wasn't just a destination but a journey, one that required patience and self-compassion. It was about accepting that setbacks were a part of life, not the end of it. John continued his morning routine, working out with Jake and making sure to maintain his usual consistency at the gym. But this time, there was a difference. Instead of seeing the workout as a way to escape the stress, he now viewed it as a part of his self-care, both physically and emotionally. Each lift, each rep, was no longer just about building strength in his muscles. It was about acknowledging his limits and working within them, rather than constantly pushing them aside. As the weeks went on, John began to make changes. Not just in how he approached his workouts but in how he approached life. At work, he started being more transparent with his boss, explaining that while he was committed to the company's success, he needed better support to meet the growing demands. Surprisingly, Mr. Williams was understanding and acknowledged the immense pressure John had been under. They came up with a new plan, one that involved better delegation of tasks and more balanced expectations. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a step toward healthier work dynamics. And for John, that felt like a victory. One Saturday afternoon, John took the time to call his father, someone he hadn't spoken to in a while. They had a complicated relationship, one filled with both love and tension. But as he sat on the porch, phone in hand, John decided it was time to mend some of the broken pieces between them. "Hey, Dad," John said when his father picked up the phone. "It's John." "Hey, son. How've you been?" His father's voice was rough, but there was a familiarity in it that made John feel comforted despite the years of distance between them. "I've been doing better," John replied. "You know, it's been a crazy few months. A lot of changes. But I'm starting to get a handle on things." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "That's good to hear. You know, I've always been proud of you, John. But I also know you've had your fair share of struggles. Don't be afraid to talk about them, son. It's okay to ask for help." John felt a lump form in his throat. His father's words were simple, but they carried a weight he hadn't fully appreciated until now. Over the years, he had been taught to be independent, to handle things on his own. But hearing his father acknowledge his struggles felt like a permission slip to release some of the pressure he had been carrying for so long. "I've been learning that," John said quietly. "Learning that I don't have to do it all alone. It's something I've had a hard time accepting, but I'm getting there." His father sighed. "It's tough, I know. But remember, we all have our battles. And it's not about fighting alone. It's about how we support each other through those tough times. You've got a good family. Don't forget that." John smiled. It was the kind of conversation he had needed, even if he hadn't realized it until now. He hadn't just healed in his physical strength. He was healing emotionally, too. Reconnecting with people, rethinking old patterns, and learning to lean on others. His father's words brought a sense of peace to a place in his heart he hadn't known was broken. The next week, John put his newfound understanding of balance into practice. He made sure to schedule more time with his family, especially Nancy and Jake. Instead of rushing through the days, checking things off his to-do list, he focused on being present with them, truly present. One evening, after dinner, they sat down together to watch a movie. As the opening credits rolled, John looked at Nancy and Jake. There was a sense of warmth in the air that had been missing before. Their conversations were no longer just about logistics or the grind of daily life. They had become deeper, more meaningful. They talked about hopes, dreams, and even the challenges they were facing, as a family. It was in moments like these that John realized how much he had grown, not just as an individual, but as a father and husband. His relationship with Nancy had become more communicative, more empathetic. With Jake, he felt an even stronger bond, one that transcended just being a father figure. They were becoming true partners in life, sharing both the highs and the lows, the victories and the struggles. One afternoon, while John was out running errands, he got a text message from Matt. "Hey man, how about we grab a drink tonight? Just want to catch up more. I can sense a change in you." John smiled at the text. It had been weeks since their last chat, and though he had felt like a different person since then, he knew that it was important to keep nurturing the connections in his life. "So," he replied, "sounds great. Let's do it." That evening, the two of them met at a local bar, a cozy place that had become a favorite spot for their conversations. As they sat down, Matt wasted no time in getting to the heart of the matter. "So, John," he began, "how's everything going?" "Really going?" John leaned back in his chair, taking a moment to reflect before answering. "I think I've figured out something important," he said, his voice steady but thoughtful. "I've spent so much of my life focused on just surviving, on making sure I was strong enough to handle everything on my own. But lately, I've realized that true strength doesn't come from doing everything alone. It comes from knowing when to ask for help, when to lean on others. I've been learning how to do that more. And honestly, it's been a game changer." Matt raised his glass in a quiet toast. "I can see it. You're not just surviving anymore, John. You're living." John smiled, feeling the weight of those words sink in. He had been given a second chance, a chance to heal, to grow, and to rebuild his life in a way that was aligned with his values. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about being present. It wasn't about doing everything on his own. It was about embracing the people and the moments that truly mattered. As John walked back to his car after his conversation with Matt, he felt lighter than he had in a long time. The journey was far from over, but he knew that he was on the right path. The road to healing wasn't linear. It had its ups and downs, its moments of doubt and clarity. But it was a road that led somewhere better, toward a life of connection, balance, and strength. And in that moment, as he looked up at the stars, John knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. The morning air had a crispness to it, signaling the changing of seasons. John stood by the window of his office, gazing out at the city skyline. It had been a year since his journey had begun. The year of immense growth, hard lessons, and unexpected transformations. A year where he learned to embrace not just his physical strength, but his emotional and mental well-being as well. The phone on his desk buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. He glanced down at the screen. Nancy had sent him a message. "How's everything going today? Can't wait for tonight. Let's celebrate your success." John smiled, his heart swelling with appreciation. Celebrating success wasn't just about the victories at work or in the gym, it was about celebrating how far he had come, both personally and as a family man. He had faced his insecurities, his doubts, and his fears. And with the support of his loved ones, he had found a way to overcome them. Tonight was going to be a special evening, not just for him, but for everyone who had been part of this journey. As the day passed, John couldn't help but reflect on all the changes he had made, all the growth he had experienced. There was a time, not too long ago, when he would have pushed through every obstacle alone, silently suffering and silently thriving. But now, he understood the importance of community, of reaching out when needed, and of being vulnerable with the people who cared about him. It hadn't been easy to ask for help. It hadn't been easy to confront the fears he had buried deep inside himself. But in doing so, he had unlocked a part of himself that he never knew existed. He had found the balance between being strong and being human, between succeeding and failing, and between pushing forward and taking a step back to recharge. At work, things had started to settle. The changes he had requested, better task delegation, more support from his team, had made a world of difference. His manager, Mr. Williams, had even commended him for speaking up, and they had implemented a new strategy that allowed for better collaboration across departments. It was a win for everyone, and John felt a sense of pride knowing that his openness had brought about positive change. But what made him the most proud wasn't just the career success. It was the person he had become along the way. He was no longer just a man defined by his job or his physical strength. He was a father who took time to listen, a husband who understood the importance of emotional connection, and a friend who knew that true strength came from lifting others up. That evening, as they sat down to dinner, the family shared stories and laughter. Jake had brought home a project from school that he was proud of, and Nancy was excited about a new initiative she was starting at work. The conversation was light-hearted, but beneath it, there was a deep sense of gratitude in the air. A gratitude that had been built from months of honest conversations, shared struggles, and unwavering support. "John," Nancy said, pausing as she looked across the table at him, "I just want to say thank you. For everything. For opening up, for being there for me, for being there for Jake. You've really come a long way." John smiled warmly, his heart full. "We've come a long way, all of us. I couldn't have done it without you. You've been my rock through all of this." Jake, who had been quietly eating, looked up with a grin. "Yeah, Dad. You've been awesome. You always tell me that it's okay to mess up as long as you learn from it. Guess that's true for you, too." John chuckled, feeling a lump form in his throat. "I guess it is, buddy. I've learned a lot this year. The most important lesson: you don't have to do everything on your own. Life is a journey, and it's better with the people you love by your side." Later that night, after dinner had wrapped up and the kitchen was cleaned, John and Nancy sat outside on the porch, enjoying the quiet of the evening. The cool breeze brushed past them, and the stars above twinkled in the vast expanse of the night sky. It was the perfect ending to a perfect day. Nancy turned to John, her expression soft but filled with love. "What's next for you, John? What are you focusing on now?" John thought for a moment, taking in the simplicity of the moment. I think I'm focusing on being present. I spent so many years trying to control everything, trying to be perfect, trying to do it all. Now, I just want to be here, with you and Jake. I want to keep growing, but I also want to savor each moment. I've learned that life isn't just about reaching the finish line, it's about enjoying the journey, the people you're with, and the small victories along the way. Nancy smiled, squeezing his hand. "That's the best answer you could give. And I'm proud of you. More than you know." John nodded, his heart swelling with gratitude. "I'm proud of us, Nancy. Proud of how far we've come." As John sat back in his chair, reflecting on the last year, he realized that everything had changed. Not just on the outside, his job, his fitness, his relationships, but on the inside. The internal shifts, the mental breakthroughs, and the emotional healing were what had truly transformed him. He had learned that success wasn't just about professional accomplishments or physical strength. It was about the people you love, the way you show up for them, and the love you give and receive. He had learned that vulnerability was not a sign of weakness, but a doorway to deeper connections. He had learned that it was okay to not have everything figured out, and that embracing imperfection was part of the beauty of life. And as he looked out into the night, John felt a deep sense of peace. The road had been long, and at times, it had been difficult, but every step had been worth it. The challenges had shaped him, the lessons had grown him, and the love from his family had anchored him. John knew that his journey was far from over. There would always be more to learn, more to experience, and more to share. But for now, in this moment, he was exactly where he needed to be, at peace with himself, with his family, and with the road ahead. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?